Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement. Gabrielle, thank you for joining me on the podcast. We have been trying to have this conversation for I don't know how many months. It's actually quite ridiculous. But I always find that when this happens with guests, the day we speak is exactly the right day for us to speak. So thank you for being here. I'm sure this will be perfect timing.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Amy.
So you are a mama of 3, 10, 7, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we could start with your expectations of going into motherhood 10, 12 years ago, where you were in the world, what you were doing, and who your sense of self was.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, yes, my eldest daughter, Camille, she just turned 10. She was born in New York City in 2014. And I actually had a pregnancy before her, and that ended in miscarriage. And so for me, going into her pregnancy was a time of extreme anxiety, which I didn't feel like the first time I was pregnant. I think the first time I was pregnant, I was just so blissfully naive that everything was going to be perfectly wonderful, and I would have this child who was due in February in the middle of a New York winter, and I'd imagined everything for this baby. And then at 9 weeks, we lost that baby, and I fell into this huge depression because it was a shock that I didn't expect, even though I knew the statistics that 1 in 4 women will miscarry. I just never, ever expected it would happen to me, especially with my first baby. I think there's just, like I said, this naivety that just, it's a wonderful thing. And I wish for every woman to always have that. But I lost it very early on in my motherhood journey. So with my second pregnancy, my daughter, I was pretty anxious the whole time. I think up until the minute that she was born and she was in my arms, I was scared of losing her. And then a new anxiety comes when they're actually born in your arms. But really that pregnancy was quite, I think, stressful for me. There was obviously so many moments of excitement and anticipation. And my head just really wasn't in the motherhood game at all, honestly. Going into that pregnancy and that birth, I was working as editorial director at Victoria's Secret. I had a really big, busy job, working extreme hours, and none of that changed when I became pregnant. I was unwell. I went through those first, second trimester sort of sicknesses and fatigue, but I just pushed through as I thought you should do. And as every woman around me in New York City at a very woman-centered company was doing. So I just continued to do that as well, even though I felt pretty rotten for the first sort of 18 weeks of the pregnancy. I just did what I had to do. Kept working, kept my job, kept going. And I really just pushed through that for the entire pregnancy. So it was a wonderful pregnancy in terms of feeling good physically. I felt really good. And it was really interesting. I did yoga a couple of times a week, but other than that, I didn't really do anything to center myself or consider this experience of motherhood, something that was coming for me and to me and going to happen soon. I just thought we would, like a lot of women, I think, that we would have this baby and this baby would just come along on the journey of life with us and it wouldn't change anything. And yeah, it's a rude shock when you think that and you have a child and it changes everything. It was actually my yoga teacher when I was about 35 weeks pregnant. She sort of took me aside. I loved her. She was so beautiful, so grounding, just so peaceful. She sort of took me aside and she said, I'm just wondering if you think that maybe you'd benefit from having a doula. And I said, well, I don't know what a doula is. And she said, oh, it's just someone that kind of supports you through this pregnancy or the final weeks of this pregnancy and is at the birth with you and will support you postpartum. And I said, well, that sounds amazing. She's like, yeah, I've noticed that maybe you're just sort of on this journey, but you're kind of disconnected from the whole experience. Like you have this idea of what it's going to be, but you haven't actually thought about it. And maybe a doula would be a good idea so you can start talking some things through. And I was like, well, that is an incredible observation because it's 100% right. And I think I was just really excited to become a mum, but I hadn't really thought about it beyond that point. And I was working in New York and I had plans to return to work pretty soon after she was born. And I just thought it was all going to go to plan and that she would just cruise along in our New York City life and everything would be amazing. We didn't move from our studio apartment. So we bought a tiny little cot. That's all we bought for her other than the stroller. And that was it. And we just went into it that way.
But of course you did, because the way you said that you worked in this female-centered company, but everybody around you weren't mothers, even if they were outside of hours. Like you didn't see any examples, didn't have any role models of how it changes you. So of course you were both blissfully naive, I guess, with the first one, but then disconnected from what's coming. Like it makes sense when we don't see it around us.
Yeah, and I didn't see it at all around us. I mean, we didn't have any friends in New York that had children. I didn't, there was nobody at work. There were many mothers at work, but you're so right. Everyone was still showing up every single day and working long hours. I didn't see a shift at all. It's a really good observation because I didn't see a shift at all for any of the women there that did become mothers. And I was quite controversial because I asked for 16 weeks leave and the standard was 8. Wow. And so people were, instead of celebrating that, they were kind of maybe jealous, but also kind of shocked that I would even expect to get 16 weeks off and have my job at the end of it. And I said, I don't care if I don't have my job at the end of it. I'm taking at least 16 weeks off because I can't imagine going back to work at 8 weeks postpartum. And this is before I'd even had a child. And you know what you're like at 8 weeks postpartum. Like you definitely haven't come up for air. You're still healing fundamentally, physically from the birth. I mean, you're healing for a long time, but at 8 weeks, it's very fragile. So even at 16 weeks, it was really the last thing I wanted to do to go back to work. But I did go back to work full time at that point.
What was that like? If you would like to drop back into your body, I remember I was doing an interview recently and I kind of had this visceral memory, Gabrielle, of walking through the sliding doors of the ABC on that first day back after that first maternity leave and remembering what that felt like in my body. So I wonder if there's like a drop in, how did it actually feel?
Well, we had a nanny. We hired a nanny a few weeks before I went back to work and I felt it had a good gut feel about her, even though it was a really scary thing to hand your 4-month-old over to a stranger. But I was really strong that morning. I remember just giving her a cuddle and leaving my apartment and walking to work. And my sister was living in New York at the same time. And we always met for coffee in the morning. And I got to the corner and she handed me my coffee and I just burst into tears. And I said, this just feels so wrong on every level of my being. This just leaving my child. When I'm still breastfeeding her, she's 100% breastfed up until this point. And I'm here with my pump and all my bottles and my bag and my body that's still very much postpartum, and I'm getting on a train and just going back to a world that was so familiar to me, but now just felt so different. And I cried the whole way there and I got to work and I had an incredible, still very close to her boss there, gave me a hug again and said, welcome back, whatever we can do for you. And being in like I said, at Victoria's Secret female-centered company, many, many mothers there, the pumping or the expressing rooms there were like 5-star hotels because they want you to come back to work and pump all day long. So we had a room each, we had a phone, a TV, we had a fridge. It was like half a level of the building was this pumping area, and we had fridges just for breast milk, and so we could do our work there and we could be on meetings there and then go back to our desk. But I was pumping 3 times a day. And whereas I used to work from sort of 8 in the morning till 8 at night, that was a pretty standard day, I started leaving as you do, at 5 to run home to my baby I'd missed desperately. And just getting kind of side eye from everyone in the office, like, what do you even think you're doing? Like, I would leave my computer on and my jacket on my chair, just hoping that they would think I was coming back.
Oh, wow.
Like, I didn't feel comfortable at all doing that. I had a senior person take me aside about a month into it, and she said, you've got to choose a couple of nights a week to stay till 8, 9 at night. You're missing too much. There was no support for mothers. I mean, this is America as well, so it's very different. And I think given I grew up in Australia and culturally I was so used to this idea of taking 6 months to a year off after your first baby and that being very accepted, potentially going back part-time, like that was kind of that's what I knew. So I kind of pushed the boundaries a little bit at work, but not enough to make me comfortable with leaving my child every single day. And I wanted to be home for her. I wanted to feed her. I wanted to give her a bath and put her to bed and just have some time with her. That was heartbreaking, but I'll also admit something, like the first 4 months of motherhood were so hard, like wonderful, beautiful, but all consuming and so different to what I knew. Stepping back into a job that was just like I could do it with my eyes closed and I was very good at it and people respected me there and I got a lot of admiration. I got a lot of money. Like it was an easy thing to be doing. So it felt like I was leaving what was beautiful and hard and going back to something that was pretty easy in comparison to mothering. So in a sense, it felt like a bit of a relief to actually be in that environment and do what I used to be doing, but that, that was only to the point of me, not letting myself think about my child at home and how much I missed her and how much I was missing in that first year. And I really pushed all those emotions aside for that entirety of her first year. It was after her first birthday that I said to my husband, I really can't do this any longer. Like it's just not the idea of motherhood that I had. Not being with her, like I'm just missing so much, and I wanted to sort of go into it with him in more of an equal way, and I was the one that was always leaving every night to get home because I wanted to be there, but he wasn't doing any of that, and it's like this just feels all wrong. And James, we were lucky, he was so privileged that my husband James, he was making enough money that he's like, just leave your job, like just quit. Take some time off and then reassess in 6 months or a year. And I was like, I don't know if I can leave this job that I've worked so hard for, and I'd been there nearly 6 years in New York at that point at the same job, and still live in New York, because so much of my identity and my time in New York was wrapped up in this job that I was like, I don't think I can just not be at that job and be in this same city. So I made this drastic decision for our family, or we made it together. But I said, I just want to go home to Australia and just reset. Like it doesn't feel, I don't want to be here doing this and mothering in this way. I want to be with her more. She's everything, and I'm just missing so much. And so, yeah, almost overnight I made that decision to quit, and they did a lot to try to get me to stay. And I was like, don't just stop doing that, because this is what I wanted so much. Like everything they're saying to me is everything I'd worked so hard for. But in my mind, it was not anymore. The priorities had just shifted so much. And I was like, I can't just keep going as if she hadn't been born and she wasn't my child. Like this is
or that
my
you're
life.
The same person. That's it.
And I am a mother, and I want to mother her. Like it feels like I'm outsourcing all of that, and I don't want to do that anymore.
One of the things that I've heard over and over again over the last 15 years as I've interviewed women exactly like yourself, when they have this moment of realising, what I have fought so hard for, what I've spent so long building is not what I want at the moment anymore, is that decision in that moment is incredibly powerful and empowering, and you know that it's the right decision. But of course, a week later, 2 months later, 2 years later, whenever it is, you are deep in the monotony and pain and struggle of motherhood at home. You are deep in this loss of feeling like you don't have that career anymore, or that maybe some of your friends don't respect you the way they used to, or you don't have access to money like you used to. Like, I would love for you to share with the listeners, because I think this is really important. We talk a lot about the decision moment, but I think it's really powerful for us to talk about how that then continues to be a ongoing process of re-identity, of redefining, of making the decision again, because they're sometimes the harder ones.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's such a good point, because I feel like in the beginning it felt to me like it was absolutely the right decision. And if people were saying things to me like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, excuse me, I'm going to mother. Like, and isn't that everything and more than enough?
More than enough.
And I was very strong in that belief until the point of feeling like, that those messages were pretty strong from friends, from just in my head about everything I'd worked for and now I've let go of. How can I do both? I didn't feel like I could do both in the same capacity that I wanted to. And now I'm feeling it even more with, yes, I made a massive career shift, and yes, I love what I do now, but my son will start school in a couple of years. And I think, okay,
this is your youngest, who's now 3.
The youngest, who's 3. That's a big shift. There's going to be a lot more time. Then what do I do? And sometimes I find myself thinking and watching my friends who have stayed on that career path and seen where they're at, and watching them sort of, yes, it's been a struggle, but when their time comes and all their children are at school, they've still got this identity that they go back to, and this job and this well-paid career. And I don't, because I made a big decision to leave that. So it is an ongoing sort of conversation I have with myself. And I feel like, yes, I'm feeling it more now. And in the beginning, for the first year or two, I was very, very cruisy, very happy. My daughter was just such a delight. And like, honestly, the most fun, most sort of mature and wise child, that we had a really good time. And then I had my second daughter, and I had 2 little ones, like a 3-year-old and a newborn. And that was pretty intense. And that first winter of 2 was really hard, with pre-COVID, my husband leaving so early in the morning, coming back so late at night. We had a 2-story house, and sometimes I would struggle to get them downstairs by like 10 a.m. Like, I was just like in bed with them, really struggling, because it was so hard, and we don't have people around us supporting us. Like, I have my incredible mother and parents who came down every week, and that was my favorite day of the week, because I had community, I had support, I had someone to talk to. But the rest of the week was long, and while my daughter was the best conversationalist, she was 3. So I find myself feeling a lot less lonely now, because I have a 10-year-old who, it's a different kind of relationship and a completely different dynamic. But when you have those little children, you're not fulfilled through the conversation. It really is a lot of play, which is wonderful. It's a lot of feeding and just like routine dynamics of siblings and all of that kind of thing. So that, when you're right in that and you're thinking there isn't an outlet really, like right now I'm in this, and I don't get to do what I did when I had a 4-month-old and sort of switch off and go off to work and sit and have a coffee and lunch and talk to adults and have that kind of outlet. You don't have that if you're at home with children full time. And I think that really is a challenge. There's, like I said, there's so much beauty in it, but the challenges are also immense. And it can feel very monotonous. It can feel kind of boring sometimes. It can feel like, that you don't have the value of other people, because that's a patriarchal society that we live in, that women who are caregivers and stay at home and really focus on that and dedicate their life to that, there should be so much more reverence for it, but there's not. And it's just the world we live in. And so that really messes with your head. You really think, well, I should be contributing. I hate it when I hear mothers say I should be contributing. I'm like, do you know what you're doing is contributing so much more than anyone that walks out the door in the morning and goes to a job. Like, you're raising the next generation of humans, and they are, so lucky to have you and your presence there. But it's still really hard. It's still really hard to think, that I should be doing more.
Yeah. And I think the ongoing realignment to that version of yourself, if you've been in one part of your life, you've been in New York for 6 years, like in my mind, I've instantly got the Sex and the City sort of heels and the outfits and there's this, it's such a life. And then to completely make that decision, which you did fully aligned and aware of what that meant, and you made it for the right reasons, the right priorities. We have to acknowledge that as women, like you said, especially in our patriarchal society, but over and over again, there is this sense of but who am I now behind the doors when nobody else sees what I do every day, when there isn't Friday drinks to celebrate it, when there isn't an outfit I get to wear? And I think we dismiss that sometimes, but it's actually really important to acknowledge that it is this split between who you used to be and who you are now, which is the very definition of matrescence. So over the last 10 years or since you've come back to Australia, I know you've built a business and you now have your book out and there's so many more things that you've done. So how have you come to peace with that split of who you were and who you are, and what does it look like now?
I think I've come to peace with it over time. I think matrescence was not an idea that I had I knew I was going through matrescence, but I had no language for it with my first baby. Like, I was going through this shift that I could not put into words and nobody was talking about. I didn't have friends who were mothers in New York. I had friends at home who were mums, but they weren't admitting what they were feeling, and I felt really isolated. And the more I've learned about it, the more I'm like, okay, that's what's been happening to me, not just after my first child, but after each child that I've had. So that is like, it's so beneficial just to understand the word matrescence. I work with I think it's so much more in the zeitgeist now. Like, I think most women sort of have heard of it or understand the concept of it. But even a few years ago, I remember working with a second-time mother who was talking like very deeply about these experiences and this identity shift and this split and everything that you talk about in your work. And I said, well, it's matrescence. And I introduced her to the word, and I gave her your book actually, because we have it in Gather at the Space. And I said, read this and you will feel so much more understood. You'll feel so much more, so much deeper in your knowing that what you're going through is a normal experience for women, but we're just not talking about it enough. And so that just, in a moment sort of switched for her. She's like, okay, this is a thing. And what I'm not going crazy. Like, women experience this, but we're just not building community around it and we're not talking about it enough. So I think that is like such an important thing to know about. And I think with my first child, I had no idea of that language and no idea of that term, and I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until I started reading about it and reading particular books, and just, I felt like I just happened upon the right resources at the right time to help me really understand that this inner rage that I was feeling, that this huge split that I was feeling, that this identity shift that I was feeling was actually all part of this process of becoming a mother and changing, and realizing, and I think this is the biggest thing for me, realizing that it wasn't going to go back to the way it was before. Like, I think for a long time I was thinking I will go back. I will be the same person. I just have to go through this shift and then I'll go back to that, and actually letting go of that person, letting go of those thoughts and emotions, and knowing that the person I was before my daughter Cami was born, that I'm not her anymore. And there's a huge, I think you talk about this too, there's a huge sense of mourning and loss that goes along with that, because that is like literally a chapter that's closing in your life, and now you're looking forward to another one. And yeah, it's not until you get to that age or you become a mother that you realize that kind of even happens in life. Like, you don't really sort of process it. There's not enough spaces to process it or talk about it. And as we are processing it, it gives us an opportunity to really voice what we are missing and mourning from that time, because there will be things, and then also celebrate the learnings from it, because I think that's so important too. And as I look down the barrel to perimenopause and menopause, I think I feel lucky now to have been in this kind of, for me, I feel like everyone's talking about it, but it might just be the circles that I'm working in and being in, and the things I'm reading and listening to. But I know I have so much, depth of knowledge of matrescence that I think it really will help me sort of celebrate this next phase of my life, versus like really feeling daunted by the prospect. I actually feel quite excited by it. So
me too, as I'm, barreling down towards perimenopause. And I have to say, on the other end, welcoming my daughters into their first period, into that beginning of that ritual, I've approached in such a completely different way, knowing what I know through matrescence, and then going deeper into an understanding around these rites of passages and the seasons that we move through as women, that there's different times in our lives where we have our 20s and 30s maybe, where we're, in New York and wearing those heels and doing those things, and then it's actually meant to then evolve. We're meant to evolve through these different versions of ourselves. So in your work now, what do you do for those who may not know what you are now sharing? And I'll put everything in the show notes, of course. So yes, tell us about what you have, because it is such a beautiful example of how it changes you. And when you can bravely own it, because it is really scary to walk away from such a huge identity and a successful role and so much expectation, to then embody something completely different.
And it is completely different. I mean, my work now is so different to what I did before. I work for myself, which is a big shift, which I think has good and bad parts to it. Really, that you're working in the tiny little parts of the morning and the tiny little parts of the evening and the weekends. And my children hate that I'm working on weekends. And I'm like, I try to be there for school pickup and drop off and do everything else. And actually it's the only time I get. So trying my hardest not to work on the weekends. But it really is trying to define yourself and build a career in those tiny little margins that exist in like a busy life. And as a busy mother, it's really hard to do. But I've built a business. It's called Gather. It's a physical space in Melbourne where we do yoga, we do workshops, we do birth education, we have consultants, and we have a doula collective there. That's really the heart of the business, where I sort of work to connect families with doulas around Victoria, and we're looking to expand Australia-wide and digitising the whole experience, and that's all really exciting. But that's kind of coming in the next phase of, what I'm looking at doing next. But I connect families to doulas and work with them to find the right doula. So we have about 50 doulas around Victoria at the moment, so I'm connecting families all the time. I also work as a birth doula, so I'm very passionate about the birth space particularly. I do postpartum work as well, but usually just for my clients who want me postpartum. We have incredible postpartum doulas as part of our collective who really focus on that and believe in that work and are dedicated to that work. And I do love it too, but my heart is in that birth room with those women. So I work actively as a birth doula. I work with many families throughout the year, and I'm on call a lot of the time. So that's pretty interesting to manage with a family. But I love it. I feel very passionate about it. I feel like I'm good at that job, and I just enjoy the working with the families. I really see so much beauty in supporting a family through pregnancy, opening their eyes to this system that we're sort of having children in, which is Rachel Reed will say it's not a broken system because it is the system that was built to be and operate the way that it does. But I think for a lot of families, it feels really broken. There's so much trauma in it. So actually helping a family navigate that system and have a birth at the end that feels positive, that they felt respected in that space and that they have an experience that feels genuinely like a good experience and they can begin their parenthood journey on a high. That is like the most valuable work I could ever imagine. So I feel so lucky to be doing that work. And I've written 2 books as well in that time. So in the last sort of 4 years, I wrote The Birth Space first and the Motherhood Space came out last year. So I've loved that process of writing books. I went into it a little bit naive, I think, not knowing the kind of work that was involved.
It's like having a baby. You go into it thinking, this is going to be awesome. Wow. And then it's like labour from hell. Without an epidural.
You have a manuscript in and you're like, oh, done. And you're actually, that's just the beginning. But I'm really proud of both of those books. I feel so excited that they're out in the world. The amount of emails and DMs that I get just from people saying, this book has changed my experience in my life and everything you've read has made me feel this way and I've done this thing because of this. And, it's just like people ask, is it a successful book? And I'm like, well, I don't know. How do you define success? Like, I feel like every time I get a message and someone says that it's helped them, I feel like pretty good. So I'm really happy that they're out in the world and that they exist. And I keep getting asked about my 3rd book. I don't have one there yet. I don't know if I'll ever do another one, especially the second one was like, it was a longer process, pretty hard for our family to manage. And so after all of this time and thinking, I'm going to leave this high-power, high-stress job in New York, actually coming back and starting a business, writing books, being a doula, like it is a lot. And I felt like the last few years for our family has been a lot of tag teaming and not a lot of family time. And now that my daughter is 10, she's actively saying there's just not enough. And I feel like so many children feel this these days. She said to me on the weekend, there's just not enough time just to be as a family. And I just want to be without things to do. And so it's just made me again, think what is best for our family and really take a step back from what I'm doing this year in terms of my doula work and my clients and in Gather and everything else, just really step back from many of the hats that I wear and try to focus a bit more on our family. And I don't love the idea that my husband has a full-time job and my children sort of see him going out the door every day and mum doesn't really work. What does she do? But, I don't love that because I'm like, I work so hard too, but they sort of see him going and coming and dad's got a job and mum's just kind of here and it's annoying when she's not. I don't love that for our family, especially our daughters. I want them to see sort of a more equal partnership and we're working really hard at that. But at the end of the day, we have to live, we have to survive. He has a job. It brings in the majority of our money. So how do I reconcile that with making sure, and he's so active with them and making sure that through all this, even though I am taking a step back, that he's still doing drop off and pick up a couple of times a week and he's very present in their lives and he's doing all of that because the step back means that actually our house doesn't look as horrific as it's looked in the last few years because I can actually get to some of that because that is pretty stressful when the house is that chaotic. And just doing some of that work that, it sucks, but like at least it feels like, someone's here sort of holding the fort. And that's just for this tiny little period in time because things have been so hard for us to manage and it has felt really tag teamy and I want to free up our weekends to be together in the way that my daughters are kind of really, verbalizing is a need for them, that they want to be here just to play and not have to run somewhere and do something. And it's so important to have that time.
It is. And, I'm just a few years ahead. So my youngest is 10, your eldest is 10. So mine is 16, 14 and 10 at the moment. And I wish I saw my daughters more. The 14-year-old and the 16-year-old, they're not even, I can't get them to come and sit down at the dinner table on a weekend with me. Yeah. They're out, they're gone. So, but what I love what I hear you saying is that these babies, these children, they are constant, canaries in the coal mine almost of calling out what's not quite right. They call it out, don't they? And if it was up to us, well, I'll just say it for myself. If it was up to me, my tendency is to go back into busy again. It is to write a book, create a charity, do that more work, and then also go and run that workshop on the weekend because I love what I do so much. And I'm trying to balance it and I'm trying to show that mum can make money too. And then along come these little voices, just like she did when she was first born in New York, that said, hey, mum, just have a think about where the balance is here right now, what season you're in. And gosh, they do this to us over and over again, don't they?
And I think I've learned so much now to listen to that voice. And I feel lucky now because I can see what you're saying as a 14 and 16-year-old. We're only a few years off that. And the last year, I think she's changed so much. That 9 to 10, I didn't think it would happen that soon. I thought maybe those emotions, those hormones might be more like 11 to 12, but it happened
it's
really
earlier these days.
Yeah. And we were kind of like, okay, whoa, okay, this is happening because it's like that sweet spot between like toddlerhood and that is so fleeting. And I don't want to be the person to say to any new mum listening, just enjoy it because like that's the last thing you want to hear when you've got little kids and it's so intense. Because I didn't want to hear that. I wanted to say no, like it's hard and it is hard and I acknowledge how hard it is, but it does go fast. And I can see her off with her friends in a couple of years and that's like I said to you before we were recorded, like when you have little ones, you think that's your life forever, like things aren't going to change. And then you wake up and things have really changed. Like I don't have babies anymore. My youngest will be 4 in September. So that feels big. And I still think of him as a baby because he's my youngest, I think. But really, 3.5, 4 is, a little person running around. And
that's it. And it's another one of these.
Be gone before I know it, and it's just breaking my heart.
That's right. It's another one of these polarities of motherhood, And it's such a cliche, but, the days are long and the years are short. But it really is enjoy it while it lasts, but also it's okay that you find it incredibly challenging and that you want the toddler years to hurry up. Like I was not great with toddler years. I found that totally, I still do. I find that I have to have this business. I have to have my outlets. But they are so great at making me remember what's important. And I think
Yeah,
that's
they
what we
are.
have to keep coming back to. Like, okay, in
Mhm.
this day, in this season, this is what's
Mhm.
important right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just love that you started off by talking about going into having your daughter in New York and really just being so disconnected from the experience, just so
Mhm.
unaware of what was coming. And then
Yeah.
that beautiful yoga teacher said, have you ever thought about using a doula? And now
Mm.
you are, oh, it gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
And now you have created a space literally called Gather, where you're
Mhm.
gathering women so they're not disconnected from this experience and they go into it with the doula, with support and with their eyes fully
Mhm.
wide open. I think it's
Yeah.
such a phenomenal reminder of what we learn through this experience and how we then change as women to make sure that others have that experience too.
Yeah, I think it's just so important to give a woman the opportunity to have a space to talk when she's pregnant, when there's so much going on in her head, but no one's giving her an opportunity to say those things out loud. Like, you think that maybe, we hire private obstetricians and think that they're going to hold space for us. And actually, that's not their job. They're never going to
Mhm.
do that because that is not their job. They are for high risk pregnancies and they know what they're doing in the cesarean, not so much a physiological birth. So, midwives are incredible. Private midwives are incredible. Midwives in the system are so pushed. They don't have time to sit with a woman in a hospital setting and say, but how are you? How are you feeling? Not only physically, because, that really is their priority, but what's your emotional health like? How are you feeling about your pregnancy? How are you feeling about becoming a mother?
Mhm.
If you're with somebody, how's your relationship? What are you nervous
Mhm.
about? How can we talk
Mhm.
about what it's going to look like postpartum? How are you going to prepare for your postpartum? Who's going to be looking
Mhm.
after you? There are so many things that we have to think about and consider to make sure that we're on the right foot, going forward into our motherhood experience. Those first few tender weeks and months can change the first few years of motherhood, just in a physical sense, that we maybe aren't as depleted as somebody like me. First baby, New York City, I was having champagne and brunch day 3. Like, I was out of the hospital and here I am with all of my friends at the cafe having brunch like I used to do, because my life wasn't going to change, remember? So
Mhm.
that's what I was doing. I was at rooftop parties. I was at gallery openings. I went to a
Mhm.
wedding 10 days postpartum, breastfeeding my child, like heels, all the things. And then I had my second child and I was so depleted, so low in iron, so many things. And I never gave myself an opportunity to rest at all. And it wasn't until my third baby that I knew so much more. I had become a doula. I did my first 40 days in bed and it was just bliss. And I didn't feel guilty for 1 second of it. My husband brought me my 6-7 meals a day for the first sort of 3 weeks that he took off work. And then I had my postpartum doula and I had all the world around me just supporting me because I put all those things in place. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. And I had 2 children. I had one at school and I had a 3-year-old. And I made it work because I said, no, this is really, really important. And I know how important it is now for our mental and physical health to be cared for in those postpartum days. So having a space just to have those conversations and just to make women and families, men, mindful that this is a really important thing to budget for and to prioritize versus the things that we buy in
Mhm.
for our babies, which very cute, very fun.
So
They're not
unnecessary.
going to help long term. They're not going to help our mental health. They're usually pretty unnecessary. And I just wish, because not everyone can afford it, and I just wish there was more government funding, recognition for women. I mean, this is a whole other podcast and conversation, but like what the support we need postpartum in terms of mental health, physical recovery, physiotherapy, lactation consultants, doulas, all the things that cost a lot of money. If you can't afford it, you miss out. And it shouldn't be the case, because, if we threw money behind our mothers and said, actually, you matter so much, instead of giving them 1 6-week checkup where nothing happens. Like, I remember walking out of my first one and being like, excuse me, like what, you didn't even debrief my birth. You just kind of said, here's some contraception and you can exercise now, off you go. And that's the experience of so many women. And I was like, well, I'm sorry, there's so much I need to talk about. And I didn't have that experience until my third pregnancy, really, about all the things I needed and wanted. And I had this perfect postpartum, and he breastfed super well. And my girls had a difficult journey with both of them. And my son breastfed until he was 3 because he just loved it. And it was such a seamless journey. And I was nervous about it because I'd had such difficult experiences with my daughters. And I don't know if it was because I rested and was in bed and just prioritized that bonding and feeding, but it kind of, it helped. I'm sure it helped. And
that's it. We need to do it so differently. And I know your goal and my goal and so many others in this space, our goal is to make sure that this is accessible for all mothers everywhere and not just the privileged. So thank you for creating the space where they can gather. Thank you for writing the books and for sharing your wisdom today. I feel like our stories have so many similar crossovers. It's just really beautiful to hear what you've done with that experience of such a massive identity shift, such a huge awakening in a way, and now how you've landed back into what you want to do with this and how you're sharing it with others. But I also want to say I'm really grateful of how honest you are about what that looks like on a day-to-day basis and the reality of the kids still, think mum needs to be there all the time and what this really looks like, because I think sometimes we don't paint a clear picture on that as well. So thank you, beautiful. Thank you so much for being in this space with me.
You're welcome. Thank you, Amy, for having me.
Thank you. So I'll put all the details of where they can buy your books, and if they're in Melbourne, obviously, come and pop in together. And if and when, I won't say if, when you grow, please let us know so we can all be a part of that as well. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, as always, for being a part of our global matrescence community. Please take a moment and make sure you're subscribed to this podcast in your podcast player so you can always be notified of our next episode. And if you would like to work with a coach on your own experience of matrescence, please go to mamarising.net and explore our directory of phenomenal coaches, workshop leaders, space holders and facilitators around the globe. You can also explore our Global Matrescence Foundation and consider donating so a mama in need can access the support of one of our coaches and still ensure that our coaches receive the income and support they need so they can continue to work in this way. And finally, if you would like to be a coach, a facilitator and a matrescence activist in your own community, jump on our waitlist for our next intake of the Mama Rising Facilitator Training at mamarising.net. Thank you for being here and being part of this movement. Until next week, bye.